If you are watching this right now, it means you hold something millions of Americans take for granted every single day, a driver's license. That small plastic card sits quietly in your wallet, rarely questioned, rarely thought about, yet it controls something far bigger than driving. It controls freedom, independence, income, family access, and in many cases, personal survival. And what most people do not realize is that January 2026 is being positioned as a turning point for how that freedom is regulated, measured, and monetized. Not through a single loud announcement, not through a dramatic speech on television, but through a slow series of quiet changes that almost nobody is tracking until the penalties start arriving in the mail. Right now, people think of traffic tickets as small inconveniences, something you deal with and forget. But the regulatory philosophy behind driver enforcement has been shifting for years, moving away from simple safety and toward behavioral control. States are no longer just interested in whether you can safely operate a vehicle. They are interested in how often you drive, where you drive, how long you drive, whether your car is properly tracked, whether your insurance status updates in real time, and whether you meet a growing list of compliance requirements that did not exist even 5 years ago. This is why January 2026 matters. It is not a random date. It is when several overlapping rule changes, database upgrades, and enforcement systems are scheduled to fully synchronize. Once that happens, penalties that used to be avoidable become automatic. Notices that used to require manual review become instant. And fines that used to require a police officer pulling you over begin to generate themselves through cameras, sensors, and cross-agency reporting. The average driver still imagines a traffic stop when they think about getting fined. But the modern system does not need a traffic stop. It needs data. Your license, your plate, your insurance, your registration, and increasingly your driving behavior are all being fed into interconnected systems that talk to each other continuously. When one element goes out of compliance, the system flags you, and once flagged, the penalties start to accumulate. This is where most people get caught off guard. They assume they will be warned. They assume they will get a notice before anything serious happens. They assume that if something changes, someone will tell them clearly. But that assumption is exactly what the new model exploits. Instead of warnings, there are updates buried in fine print. Instead of public campaigns, there are technical adjustments inside state systems. And instead of grace periods, there are automated fees that start charging as soon as a threshold is crossed. Consider how modern toll roads already work. You no longer stop at a booth. A camera reads your plate, a system checks your account, and if something is wrong, you receive a bill weeks later, often with extra penalties added. That same model is being applied to driver compliance. If your insurance lapses for even a short period, if your registration is not synced properly, if your address is outdated, if your vehicle data does not match what is on file, the system logs it. You might not know today, or tomorrow, or even next month, but when January 2026 enforcement thresholds go live, those logs become chargeable events. What makes this especially dangerous for ordinary drivers is that many of these issues are not caused by reckless behavior. They are caused by clerical errors, delayed updates, mismatched databases, or life changes like moving, switching insurers, or buying a used vehicle. Under the old system, these were inconveniences you could fix. Under the new system, they can become revenue events. This is why you are seeing such aggressive investment in license and vehicle data infrastructure across states. The goal is not simply safety. It is compliance at scale. When compliance becomes automated, fines become predictable. And when fines become predictable, they become budget items. Governments begin to rely on them. That is when enforcement shifts from corrective to extractive. Drivers who have gone years without a ticket are often the most vulnerable to this change because they are not conditioned to check their status constantly. They assume that if something were wrong, someone would tell them. But the system is being designed so that the first notice is not a warning. It is a bill. As January 2026 approaches, more categories of violations are being defined as administrative rather than criminal. That sounds less serious, but it is actually more dangerous financially. Administrative violations do not require court. They do not require proof beyond a reasonable doubt. They only require a database match. If the system says you were out of compliance, the fee is generated automatically. Disputing it becomes your responsibility, and until you do, late fees and interest can stack on top. This creates a situation where drivers who are not paying attention can find themselves hundreds or even thousands of dollars in debt without ever having been stopped by a police officer. And because many of these fines are tied to license status, failure to pay can lead to suspensions, which then create even more violations if you continue driving to work, to medical appointments, or to take care of family. The cycle is simple and brutal. A small compliance error becomes a fine. The fine becomes a debt. The debt threatens your license. The threatened license creates more violations, and all of it can happen quietly, in the background, until it suddenly shows up as a crisis. This is not speculation. This is how automated enforcement already works in areas like tolling, parking, and emissions compliance. Driver licensing is simply the next frontier. January 2026 is when enough of these systems are expected to align that the volume of penalties increases sharply. Most people will not connect this to policy. They will think they were unlucky, or that they missed a notice, or that they did something wrong. But the real story is structural. A system designed for safety has been re-engineered for revenue and control. In the next section, we will look at exactly how these changes are being rolled out at the state level and why certain drivers, especially those who are older, lower income, or self-employed, are being hit the hardest. What makes this shift so difficult to detect is that it does not arrive as a single law or a single announcement. Instead, it arrives as a mosaic of small regulatory updates, software upgrades, and administrative rule changes that, when combined, produce a radically different enforcement environment. State motor vehicle departments, insurance verification systems, toll authorities, and even municipal parking databases are being integrated in ways that were not technically possible a decade ago. Each agency still claims it is only doing its own job, but the effect is that your driving life is now being monitored by a unified compliance network. For example, when you renew your insurance today, you might assume that your insurer updates the state, and that is the end of it. In reality, that update travels through multiple clearinghouses, and any delay, formatting error, or mismatch between your policy data and your vehicle record can create a temporary non-compliance status. Under the old model, that status might have sat unnoticed until your next renewal. Under the new model, it is logged, time-stamped, and eligible for enforcement. The same applies to registration, emissions testing, address changes, and even name changes. Each of these touches a different database, and January 2026 is when many states plan to require real-time synchronization instead of periodic batch updates. Real-time synchronization sounds efficient, but it also means that any gap, even a short one, becomes visible and actionable. This is where the fines begin to multiply. A lapse that lasts a week might not matter to you, but in a real-time compliance system, it can generate multiple chargeable events. Each day of non-compliance can be treated as a separate violation. By the time you realize there was an issue, the system may already show a stack of penalties waiting to be issued. Older drivers are particularly exposed to this because they are more likely to have legacy records. A license that was issued decades ago, a vehicle that has been transferred multiple times, or an address that was updated manually instead of digitally can all create data inconsistencies. The system does not see these as understandable quirks of a long life. It sees them as discrepancies. Discrepancies trigger flags. Flags trigger fines. Self-employed drivers and gig workers are also at higher risk. If you use your car for deliveries, rideshare, or freelance work, your mileage, location patterns, and even driving hours can be inferred from various data sources. Some states are already experimenting with usage-based insurance and mileage reporting. When those systems link up with licensing and registration data, it becomes easier to justify additional fees, surcharges, or compliance requirements that only apply to people who drive more. The irony is that the people who rely on their vehicles the most are the ones who will feel these changes first. If you miss a notice because you are busy working, the system does not pause. It continues to log. And when January 2026 enforcement protocols go live, those logs convert into charges. Another layer of this system involves automatic plate readers and traffic cameras. These devices are no longer just looking for stolen cars or red light violations. They are being integrated into broader compliance networks. A camera can confirm whether your plate is valid, whether your registration is current, and whether your vehicle is associated with an active insurance policy. If any of those checks fail, the system records an event. You might drive past a camera without even noticing it. You might do so dozens of times. Each pass is another opportunity for the system to verify your status. And if your status is off, each pass can become another data point used to justify a fine. What is most unsettling is how little human judgment is involved. There is no officer deciding whether to let you off with a warning. There is no clerk checking whether a delay was reasonable. The system simply sees compliance or non-compliance. And when it sees non-compliance, it acts. Governments justify this by pointing to efficiency and safety, but the revenue implications are impossible to ignore. When fines are generated automatically, collection rates go up. When collection rates go up, budgets start to rely on them. Once that happens, there is a built-in incentive to expand what counts as a violation. This is why the list of finable offenses related to driving keeps growing. It is no longer just speeding or reckless driving. It is paperwork, data alignment, account status, and digital identity. If any part of that web is out of sync, you are at risk. The psychological impact of this system is also significant. People begin to feel that driving is no longer a neutral activity. It becomes something that can expose them to invisible risks. That anxiety leads to more compliance, more payments, and less resistance, which is exactly what the system is designed to produce. By the time January 2026 arrives, many drivers will already be inside this network without realizing it. They will think nothing has changed right up until the first fine arrives. And when it does, it will not feel like a warning. It will feel like a verdict. In the final section, we will examine what this means for you personally and what practical steps you can take to reduce your exposure before these systems fully activate. The most important thing to understand right now is that this is not about panic, it is about preparation. Systems that rely on automation are powerful because they are indifferent. They do not know who you are, how long you have been driving, or whether you have always followed the rules. They only know what their databases show at the moment they check. That means your best defense is not arguing later. It is making sure those databases are clean before January 2026 turns every discrepancy into a financial liability. Start with the basics, but treat them as critical infrastructure rather than routine paperwork. Your license status, your registration, your insurance, and your address all need to match across every system that touches them. That means checking not just what you have in your hand, but what the state has on file. If you moved in the last few years, if you changed insurers, if you bought or sold a vehicle, or if you renewed anything online, there is a chance something did not sync properly. A 10-minute verification today can prevent a $1,000 problem later. Many drivers assume that because they have not received a notice, everything must be fine. That assumption is dangerous in an automated environment. Notices are no longer the first line of defense. They are the last. By the time a notice is generated, the system has already logged a violation. If you want to avoid fines, you need to look for problems before the system looks for them. This is especially true for older drivers and anyone with a long driving history. Legacy records are more likely to contain outdated formats, incomplete fields, or mismatched identifiers. A name that includes a middle initial in one system and not in another can be enough to cause a failure to match. The computer does not know that these records refer to the same person. It only knows that they do not align. Another area to watch closely is insurance verification. Many states are moving toward continuous coverage monitoring. That means they are not just checking whether you are insured when you renew your registration. They are checking every day. If your policy lapses for even a short time, or if your insurer is late in reporting a renewal, the system may mark you as uninsured. Once that mark exists, it can trigger fines that keep accumulating until the record is corrected. For people who switch insurers to save money, this is a hidden risk. A gap of a few days between policies might not feel important, but in a real-time compliance system, it can generate multiple violations. The savings you gained by switching can be wiped out by automated penalties that arrive weeks later. The same logic applies to registration and emissions testing. If your state requires periodic inspections or renewals, make sure they are completed and properly recorded. Do not assume that passing the test means the database was updated. Follow up. Get confirmation. Keep digital copies of everything. When disputes arise, documentation is your leverage. It is also wise to monitor any online portals your state provides for drivers. Many departments now offer dashboards where you can see your license status, registration status, and sometimes even compliance flags. These portals are often the first place an issue appears. Checking them regularly is like checking your credit report. You are not looking for what you did wrong. You are looking for what the system thinks you did wrong. Beyond the technical steps, there is a broader mindset shift that helps in this new environment. Driving is no longer just a physical activity, it is a digital relationship with the state. That relationship is governed by data. The more accurate and current that data is, the less exposed you are to automated enforcement. Some people will choose to ignore this until it becomes a problem. They will tell themselves that nothing bad has happened yet, so nothing will. But January 2026 is not about what has happened in the past. It is about how the future system will interpret the past. Logs that are being created right now will be used to generate fines later. The window for prevention is before the switch is fully flipped. There is also a political dimension to this that is worth acknowledging. When enforcement is automated, it becomes less visible and less controversial. There are no angry interactions on the roadside. There are no viral videos. There are just envelopes in the mail and charges on your account. That makes it easier for these systems to expand quietly. The only people who notice are the ones who are paying. By taking control of your data now, you put yourself in a position of strength. You may not be able to stop the system from changing, but you can make sure it has less leverage over you. That is the real goal. Not to fight every rule, but to avoid being trapped by the ones you never knew existed. As January 2026 approaches, more people will begin to feel the pressure. You will hear stories about unexpected fines, suspended licenses, and bureaucratic nightmares. Some of those people will be at fault. Many will not. The difference will often come down to whether their records were clean when the automated checks began. You do not need to live in fear of this, but you do need to respect it. A system designed to operate at scale does not slow down for individuals. It rewards those who prepare and punishes those who assume. Your driver's license still represents freedom, but that freedom now depends on something new: digital compliance. Making sure that compliance is in place is one of the smartest things you can do before the calendar turns.